Good morning, everyone. Bill, are you prepared to lead us off?
I have a prayer.
Good. Jeff, wait a minute. Jeff Busch, as a matter of information, we are a outreach of First Presbyterian Church. I don't know if you knew that or not, and so we always like to lead off a little devotional or prayer before we start. So that Bill Linton is one of our facilitators, and he has that responsibility. So that's what that's all about.
No problem.
Okay, Bill Linton.
Well, good morning, all. Nice to see you. I hope you have power. We don't have power this morning, so I'll be doing a double prayer.
When do you go out?
Sometime during the night, but we shall overcome. So if you would, bow your heads for a word of prayer. We are weary, Lord, bone tired, weary to the point of tears and past them. Your word says you never grow weary. But we know you understand weariness, because once you dragged the heavy cross up a long, lonely hill, many times you had nowhere to lay your head, and people who needed you rest upon you by day and by night. Our reservoir is depleted, almost dry, for longer than we remember. We have been dredging from its sludgy underside, giving our selves and our loved ones the leftovers of a life occupied with endless tasks. The elastic of my life is so stretched out of shape. It doesn't snap back anymore. Just once I'd like to say it is finished, like you did. But you said it just before you died. Our job won't be over till life is. And that's okay, Lord. If you just give us strength to live it, deliver us from this limbo of half-lives, not just striving, but thriving. You who know all, you who know us are better than we know ourselves. Deposit in our account that as we spend ourselves overall, there may be always more to draw from. Give us strength to rest without guilt, to run without frenzy, soar like an eagle over the broadless canyons of the life we still have you still have for us, both here and beyond. Amen.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Let's see, do we have anyone here for the first time? So we got Hughes.
Do we know who 9826 is?
telephone number ending in 9826. Can you unmute and tell us who you are? *6, is that what the right thing is, Teddy? Doesn't seem to be wanting to talk. I don't think we have any new members other than that mystery person.
Do you know who that is, Teddy? We can't hear you.
I'll go find out in a minute. Who?
Okay.
On the call, 336-561-9826. Unmute yourself and introduce yourself. And unmute on the phone is *6.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Who is this?
Hi, this is Teresa Jackson. I'm watching, but I can't hear through the computer. So
Okay, good, Teresa. Good to see you today. Take care. All right.
thank you.
Good.
All right. So I don't think we have anybody new then.
Yep. Anybody got any thing they'd like to share with the members, the group?
Anybody had any interviews to brag about? Sounds like we're ready to shift gears and go to the interview.
Okay.
I will get rid of the agenda and then Teddy will do his magic.
So if all the, we'll leave Jeff Claypool, Jeff Busch, and Rob Henning on the call.
All right.
If the rest of the panelists would go ahead and turn off your cameras. And Jeff Claypool can turn his off when we get started.
How does Jeff Claypool do that?
Lower left
How
corner.
about if I do it for you? It's the bottom left of the screen, Jeff, where you see mute and stop video.
Okay. So what do I hit?
Well, don't do it now. We'll do it for you in a moment. Why don't you introduce your other Jeff?
Which one do I hit? Stop video or mute?
You'll hit,
Eddie, what do I hit?
When you're done introducing this segment, you'll hit stop video.
Okay. All right. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. We've worked on interviewing since, I think it's been July 16th, and now we're ready to put the training to the test. Practice, they say, makes perfect, so we'll see here if that's true. We've had mock interviews in the past, and it has been very, very helpful. Steve Sheffy and Tom Eaton and myself have done over 400 interviews over the past few years to try to help people get ready for that all-important interview. Local companies, and I think this is important, and because they not only have done mock interviews, they've sent somebody to Triad Career Network, but they also are familiar with the website, and they're able to go in and take a look at people that are on that website and look at potential employees. And they are also under the understanding that there is no fee to Triad Career Network to hire some of these people. All we used to get was donuts by the person who got the job to bring in donuts. So it's an opportunity for companies. We've had over 30 companies working with us over the past few years. Some of the companies have come in 2 and 3 times, but to give you some idea, we've worked with Volvo in the past. We worked with Sealy, Lincoln Financial, Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, Humana, Slane Hosiery Mills, Syngenta, PNC Bank, Tech Systems, BB&T, Molina Healthcare, Pulaski Furniture, Enos Flint, TRC, Express Personnel, Atkins and Associates, Guilford Public Schools, City of Greensboro, VF Corporation, Cone Health, Walmart, Lowe's, and Corvo. Let's just give you some idea of the number of companies that have been in here to help us out on mock interviews. And Jeff Busch has been kind enough to come and help us out today with a mock interview from, I'm going to say, Tempur Sealy. Sometimes it's hard for me to get used to putting that first word in there, but I'm working on it. And Jeff's kind enough to come in. He actually was going to come in before the COVID-19 or whatever you want to call it started. And we had the session canceled, so Jeff wasn't able to come in, but he's been kind enough to come with us now. And because of the virus, the mock interviews or the interviews on the computer have become more prevalent. And so I thought it would be good today, and Jeff agreed to do it. And again, I want to say thank you to Jeff Busch, because it's great for him to take that opportunity to come in. Jeff's been with Sealy for 6 years. He's been in human resources. I might say a great area to be from. And he then worked for Ecolab, and Jeff told me he had been there 11 years before that. And prior to that, he graduated from University. I want to welcome Jeff today. And then we had Rob Henning, who was one of our group members who volunteered. And it wasn't a volunteer by us picking him. He actually put his hand up and volunteered for the interview with Jeff Busch and Tempur Sealy. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Jeff Busch. He was kind enough to send a job description to Rob. And so Robbie's had that to take a look at. So we'll go ahead and do the interview. And then after the interview, Robbie can ask any questions he wants to of Jeff. And then maybe we'll open it up to the group. They can ask questions. And then maybe after that, Jeff can talk a little bit about Sealy, their employment process, some of the different jobs that they have open during the year, and answer any other questions that you might have. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. So I know this is a mock interview, but usually at the start of an interview, HR is usually one of the last people that meets with candidates. So my interviews are always a little bit different than what candidates have had in the past. So Rob, what I would tell you is I'm not going to focus necessarily on the technical aspects of the job in terms of whether you have the right experience or not. The questions I'm going to have are sort of more of the softer skills related to the position, as well as more like organizational fit type questions. Additionally, the questions that I have are going to ask you to pull from previous experiences. So as you're thinking through your answers, the one piece of advice I would give you is make sure that if you start talking about here's what I would do, that you sort of reframe it and think here's what I've done in the past. So most of the questions I'm going to ask are going to ask you to think through prior work experience, volunteer experience, education background, and tell me about, a specific situation and how you acted in that. And I'll help guide you through with some follow-up questions as we go through that. But kind of the first area that I'd like to talk through is one of the key things that we look for, in our engineering group here is, the ability to adapt as change comes in, right? As either the market changes or as we're looking at, different products based on consumer demand. So again, how does an individual, work through change in their, work environment, in their culture, in their work structure? So could you tell me about a situation where you had to adjust quickly to a significant change, either in your organization, in your department, or even just something as simple as sort of the priorities that your team was focused on? So kind of walk me through what the change was, how it affected you, and sort of what actions you took to continue to be effective throughout that process.
Okay, yeah, being a I had a lot of my experience was in product development. There was many situations, but one in particular I'm thinking of is where we already had a product out there in the market, and there was a problem with it from the way it was originally designed before my time. And basically had, the sales department came in and the customer was not happy, wanted an answer. So I was in the position to, I had a great idea for how we can move through it. And so having to work with the product that was already out there, already released, already at the customer, and coming up with a new design, prototyping it and get it to the customer as soon as possible. So I became involved talking with some of the engineers with our customer, trying to give them some sense of, okay, we're working on this is the plan, come up with some illustrations, some design showing this is what we're planning on doing, and give them a rough time frame to begin with, when we plan on getting that product to them, or that retrofit, I would call it. And and anyways, it worked out real well. It took a number of, I'd say about 6 months to finally get everything worked out, but working with current inventory, separating it, bringing in a new design, and then finally doing a full release. But it was quite challenging, but I enjoy that kind of thing. I hate when the customer has to be the recipient of a bad design when it wasn't really dealt with to begin with, but it was a great way to finish it, and they were happy with what we came up with.
Okay, great, thank you. Same question. Can you think of another example of a time when maybe it was a bigger change, thinking maybe like organizational change, where you had to adjust quickly to something, and how did it affect you, and how did you respond to it?
So you're saying like an internal change?
Yeah, so I mean, the previous example you gave me was something that sounds like a customer came and it was a change to a product. Can you think of one where you had a change in, and I'm going to give you a couple examples, but feel free to pick from whatever makes the most sense for you, but direction of the company changed, significant change in leadership, significant change in, how things were budgeted or allocated, where it had a pretty significant impact on maybe what you did, on a day-to-day basis, or or even how you did it, I guess is another way of phrasing it.
I don't have a great example for that. The thing, I don't want to go into all the details, but one company I was with, there was actually somebody that was higher up that was let go that affected engineering. And
okay.
So there was this void. The reality is it didn't really affect, I mean, things were kind of going as they were, but I guess I could say is that it created a lot of turmoil in the company from production to assembly, a lot more to do with morale. So I worked closely with some of these people and just trying to reassure them, even though it wasn't really my position. I mean, I didn't have the power to implement these changes, but just trying to say, let's take one day at a time, let's work with what we have and not focus so much on some of the negative things that were happening. So I don't know if that's a real good example or not, but those are some, I mean, it affected the company, but it didn't directly affect me and my daily thing. It affected more the people around me. But I've always been one to really try to see how people are doing, even in a product that I design, just go out there with them and try to understand if what I've done, is it good, is it bad? So in that respect, with that situation that came up with somebody being let go, I tried to step in with people that I worked with and tried to create, I guess you could say, some reassurance that, hey, we're going to get through this.
Okay. How'd that turn out? What was the sort of end result of that?
Well, basically, like I've seen a lot, it's like the position was more absorbed internally, so they didn't replace the person. So it kind of, in some respects, it wasn't handled real clearly as far as the communication from the top to the company.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of went into this vacuum where people didn't really know. But so, I mean, everything carried on, but it wasn't how I would have liked to see. And a lot of people were kind of disappointed in how the management handled it.
Okay. So that sort of leads me into my next question around sort of this adaptability theme. Oftentimes, organizations communicate things sort of from a top-down perspective, and then the farther away you get from the top, the less clear or the less sort of the rationale gets made right. So not every organizational change is explained clearly or communicated effectively. Can you give me an example of a time where you found out about an unexpected change or a change that wasn't communicated well, that confused you, and sort of what steps you took to make sure that you had the information you needed to continue to be effective in your role?
Yeah, that's happened a number of times, and especially in product development and design, where in the case it was my superior and it wasn't communicated of a change that was done. And it kind of created this void, and the customer actually reached out to me, even though I wasn't directly involved in the project. And it just slowly merged over to my care and my management, which was fine. It's just the way it was handled. So I very quickly picked up on and tried to communicate with my superior as well. It's like, hey, I understand that this was a change, it wasn't communicated, but let me know what I need to do. So that they gave me what information they had, and I basically just took it and started dealing directly with the customer and also with our sales department and president to say, this is the direction we're going.
How did that turn out in the end?
It turned out real well. I mean, actually, the customer, it was a product line. It kind of mushroomed to many products, very similar, but kind of like a product line of different sizes. And so I worked real well with the engineer on the other end from the customer. I enjoy things like that. So I like the challenge of it. I hate how it starts out and how there's a level of frustration, but I'm more than happy to try to step in and try to create the communication and then try to, all right, let's get a picture here of what we're trying to do and make sure that we're all on the same page and then have a plan to move forward.
Sure. Yeah, no, that can definitely be frustrating when changes aren't communicated, and it's nice to be able to work through them, I think, in the end. But yeah, I can understand some of the pain there of not knowing. You're sort of in that limbo for at least, sometimes it can be a long period of time. Other times it might just be a couple hours, but any of that time is frustrating. Appreciate that.
I'm sorry, the customer, in the end, they got their product and everything worked out real well. There were some problems, but the thing I realized is that more than anything, people want to just have an answer and want to hear like, hey, we're sorry, we're working on this, instead of creating this void where it's like, what's going on? So, I mean, to me, it's an easy thing to do, but for some reason, it seems like that's more common than I realized. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I can think of times when that's happened here as well. Okay, great. No, that's fantastic. So, the other area that I think is another kind of critical skill or area, in our organization, we're a pretty flat organization. So we don't have a whole lot of layers, from, the sort of some of the entry level positions all the way up through some of the management and executive roles that we have. And so we really ask our employees, in different departments and different roles to be effective at building relationships and partnerships with other work functions, because again, a role in engineering in our new product development team is going to have to work hand in hand with manufacturing, because we're not going to release a product to manufacturing without having tested it first. So, being able to build, relationships between sort of your day-to-day work area and then another area, another team, another department, is a critical skill for anybody within this organization. And getting people, from outside of your work team to cooperate oftentimes is going to require them to commit time for your benefit. Could you tell me about a time where you had to get someone outside of your immediate work team or work department to commit time that was really for your benefit, and kind of what was the situation and how did you get them to commit that time that you needed?
Oh gosh, yeah, there's a number of cases. I guess the one thing I'm thinking of right now is our production manager in where I used to work, and understanding the process, because there's a lot of paperwork. They had an old system, but they were trying to implement a new system. So I really wanted to understand how things work, so we don't just make these steps in the new, but that I understand how it's done currently. We don't create more of a mess. So, I mean, it's somebody that had been there for a long time. So I always try to value people regardless of their background. But if somebody's been there for 20, 30 years, I think that they got to know something. So I've always tried to really pick people's brains. It's like, if I need to know something, it'll make their job easier, my job easier. Just whatever information experience they have that will make things go smoothly. So in this particular case, we was trying to reduce paperwork. There's a lot of redundancy that was being done. But before that began, I had to understand how it was being done. Then I said, what can we do to make it easier? Is there anything from the engineering side that we can actually do so you're not having to go back and do the same work again? And so certain things were implemented to where the release of components or product was not going through multiple hands, or it was multiple work being done. And that worked out pretty well.
Okay. You mentioned that was a pretty common occurrence. Can you give me another example of a time where you had to get somebody maybe that didn't want to commit? So just changing the question a little bit, but where you had to get somebody to commit time for your benefit that maybe was initially reluctant to do so, and how you overcame some of those objections they had?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, there are people that, again, they kind of get used to their world and they don't want to go outside of that. So in this case, it was working with the assembly and shipping department. and me being the product developer engineer, and we're assembling valves, have to write the instructions, the whole procedure. I have to know what fixturing they have, what stations they have. And I wouldn't get response. So, I mean, I could very easily, I went to their office and spoke with them. I didn't want to act like I'm trying to breathe down their necks or anything, but I needed answers. So I was trying to be as respectful as possible. And in some cases, and I think email is a great tool, but it can also be used as a weapon. And I don't want to do that, but I would try to, send an email to them and also include a couple other people. So put a little bit of pressure on them to say, hey, I really need your help here. And so I've dealt with a number of cases like that where sometimes you don't get responses, but eventually you get people out of their comfort zones, which it shouldn't be like that, but to where they can give me the information and I can help them, or they can help me to where I can write the instructions that will match our current assembly layout or our fixture, make sure I'm calling out the right tooling and so on and so forth.
Okay. So along those same lines, right, within any organization, every department has, ideally, right, you'd like to have an organization where everybody's working and driving towards the same goal. However, it's often the case in which, there are conflicting department goals in order to get to sort of this end product. Can you tell me about a time where you had to modify your goal or your department's goal in order to benefit another department?
Yeah, I'm trying to, I know there's cases, I just can't think of one right this minute. So where I had to modify.
Yeah, so you go ahead, sorry.
So there's been times where I've been working on multiple projects and it would have been much more efficient for me to get done with project A, but project B, in reality, project A didn't have to get done. It was just more efficient for me to get it done. I was focused on it, everything was going well, but somebody, wanted project B to get done with first, even though they were not over me. But it's like, at the same time, it's like, you know what? I can do A and B. It doesn't make a lot of difference. So then there's a little waste of time there for me switching gears. So I would do things like that just to make, and in doing that, people respect that. And then the next time around, they're more than willing to kind of maybe be a little more honest with you, or like, hey, don't worry about it so much. You can, as long as they get it done by, 1 week or 2 weeks, whatever the case may be. So there are times like that where I've had to shift gears. And generally when it's my superior, then there's really no question, but I still will bring up to them as like, hey, I'm working on A, which I think would be more efficient if I did this, but if you want me to switch, that's fine. So I'm more than willing to shift gears, regardless if it's a superior or somebody under me, if it's not going to, affect things in a negative way.
Okay. Great. Just switch screen here. All right. So then, so one of the last areas I just kind of want to touch on here a little bit is the sort of, I guess, work environment. So especially in our engineering team, nobody works on an island, right? Every project that we have is going to have multiple people that have input into it, and that are going to need to, at the end of the day, sort of provide their input, or at a high level provide sort of like a sign off to say, yep, we reviewed this looks good, right? Whether that's the fabric components, or the design component, or the structural component, or the internal components, right? So when we make a mattress, right, there's a lot of different components that get considered, before that final product is released or approved, to move into a production status. So, successful people in our, engineering team need to be, able to both actively participate as a team member, but also sort of encourage and develop other people and make sure that, the whole team is sort of sharing their feedback. And you got a lot of different personalities and a lot of different styles of communicating. So it can be a challenge, especially for somebody who's, would be in like a lead type of a role or project manager type of a role. Can you think of a time where you were on a team where you had to, make more than a normal effort in order to get a more quiet team member involved in the discussion? So kind of walk me through, what was going on, and specifically what you did or said in order to get that person more involved.
So yeah, there's a time I'm thinking of is, again, it was a product where I was involved. Really, a lot of the companies I work for have been smaller companies, so you have a bigger role in a lot of the areas. But In this case, I was working with the actual assemblers, which wasn't really my direct responsibility because they have their supervisors. But there was a real lack of motivation with this one product because it had really was not managed well from the beginning. So the assemblers that were working on it never had great instruction. So I really got involved with them, and they allowed me to do it to first figure out what they're used to doing. And then from there, I mean, I asked them for suggestions. What do you think would work good? Now, it doesn't mean everything they said was going to happen, but I wanted to see how they thought. And then I had a plan as far as how to clean up, in this case, the assembly station for this one product. But I kept giving them input. And then when I made decisions of how we're going to move forward, I would present it to them, said, this is what I plan on doing. Do you see any problems with this? So every step of the way, I tried to make sure that they felt like they were a part of it. And some of the people, like talking about quiet people, were not used to being asked questions. But I would really try to bring it out of them. It's like, hey, I really do. I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. I need your inputs and know that if you think this is good. So I try to give them a level of confidence that even in some cases, laying it before them, it's like, think about it for a few hours or for a day and let me know. I'll come back to you if I don't hear from you and see if you have had any ideas. So in those cases, I would really try to involve, and in this case, there was more than one person. And some people were quieter, some people were more outspoken, but try to manage and hear them all and get their input, and then try to bring them together as a team in the end is what I was really trying to do. Because if they didn't, they would all be doing their own thing and we wouldn't get anywhere. And it worked pretty well. Again, since it wasn't my direct responsibility for these people, it was hard for me to, I guess since there's no repercussions, I'll call it that. But I tried to at least respect them and let them know that their input and their, how they handle the job is very, very important to getting this product out to the customer.
So in those situations where you're sort of, you're in that, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. You're in the, you have to influence without having sort of an authority to, force a change to happen.
Right.
What sort of actions or steps would you take to, get people to contribute to the success of a team when you don't have the, for lack of a better term, we don't have that stick to say, well, look, if you don't do this, here are going to be the consequences. Where again, they don't report to you. You're really just you're asking them for your benefit. But what sort of tactics have you used in the past in order to motivate or get someone to assist when you don't have the here's the consequences if you don't type of relationship?
So yeah, I mean, in this case, we would have monthly design review meetings. So where I could, again, I don't want to use the design review meetings, sorry, this fight, if so that wasn't my goal. But so before that would happen, I would really try to communicate via email. And I would go to the supervisors individually saying, this is what I plan on doing. This is how we're moving. And I would include everybody that I thought was important or that really it was their responsibility, including the president of the company, just in a professional way. But then when the meetings came up, I would bring all the documentation with me. So not to point fingers, but if somebody would say, oh, I didn't hear for that. Well, remember, I sent you this email back on so-and-so. And, but trying to like, hey, this is your responsibility. So we've got to work together. So that's how I would do it is by communicating personally, email. And then when we have our project meetings, bring all the information together and be ready to have a discussion if there was any problems. Okay.
Anytime a team has to accomplish a goal, right? Oftentimes, it's very rare that a team is going to be able to accomplish a goal without having to get a resource or some sort of resource from another team or another area, right? That could be their time. It could just be their opinion. It could be, sort of budgetary allocations. So there's a wide spectrum of things that team may need to get as a resource from another team. Can you tell me about a time where you had to get a resource from another team and sort of what steps you took to get it, and then and how that ended up benefiting both your team as well as the team that you were getting resources from, if it did benefit them?
So when you say like a resource, you're saying it's like a
yeah, it could be a lot of things, right? It could be they loan you a person to sit on the team and kind of walk through the project. It could be simply as just getting them to respond and provide their opinion on something. It could be more complicated and having them allocate a portion of their budget to your team because you've gone over budget or need additional resources as you've kind of taken a deeper dive into whatever problem that team is trying to solve?
I don't know if
Just
this
some kind of resource that they had that you needed.
Well, this is more, I don't know if this is a good example or not, but I worked, again, with product and with tooling. I mean, I wasn't a tool engineer, but I worked with the tooling and manufacturing department real closely. So there may be a tool that is used on 50 different parts. So, and a lot of times you look at a product, you wouldn't know that. So I would have to go to them and ask them, it's like, hey, we're making a change to this part. Can you let me know by changing this, how many other parts does it affect? So I'd have to work closely with them, and they would, and a lot of times they would actually, I'm calling the resource the tool itself. I don't know if this is a good example, but.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's absolutely a resource. Yep, that's what I was looking for.
To really educate myself, and the gentleman I worked with was a really great individual. Hold on, can I? Not prepared for our home phone. All right. So I would get with them and with the tooling, and they would instruct me or educate me on how this is going to affect other products. So with that information, we may decide, okay, you know what, this is not worth to change the product with this one feature because it's going to affect all these other ones. But if it's a necessary thing, working closely with them, and as far as how this is going to affect them in the tooling, have to work out a plan to make this change as efficient as possible without creating too much problem. I don't know if was that good. I got distracted by the phone.
Yeah, you got there. That's okay. No worries.
Okay. All right.
No worries at all. Okay. So the last area I want to kind of dive into is again, because we are a fairly lean organization, right? We don't have a lot of resources to always sort of direct, here's what needs to happen next. And so we sort of expect engineers and people on our teams to be somewhat self-motivated to say, okay, here's what I did last. I know it's going to create this issue. I know that this is sort of what's going to need to, happen next, and be able to balance out like what needs to happen today, what needs to happen tomorrow, what can wait till next week. Can you tell me about a time where you identified a problem and then you took action to correct it rather than either waiting for someone else to correct it or waiting for direction on how to correct it from somebody else?
Yeah, I have a lot of experience with that, just because there have been a number of people that would sit on things until the last minute. So the way the system would work is we'd have products that would be under investigation. And a lot of times it would be assigned to someone based on how it was put into the system. But in many times when things would come up, well, that's not a good example. Hold on a second.
Yep, take your time.
Yeah. So no, I mean, like I say, a lot of that is from my experience. I mean, I'm just trying to think of an individual situation, but a lot of times information would come from, I guess, say the floor. Well, I'm sorry. That's not a good example either. I'm having a hard time here. No, a lot of the products and the things that I was involved with, I was, whenever it came up, either it would be on the schedule, and so I would have the schedule you could look at, and so even if it's down the list, if I had time, I would take care of those things ahead of time. So, and like I say, even if there was times where it was assigned to someone else, generally sometimes the production manager would come to me, just knowing that I really try to get things out there, and they would say, would you mind doing this? But I would try to go to whoever else it was responsible to if they weren't moving. It's like, hey, if you don't have time, I'm willing to do this. And in some cases, that's fine, go ahead and do it. So I was always more apt to, like, if there's time involved, for sure, I want to get the stuff done and get it out to the floor and keep production going.
Okay. Can you give me an example of a time when you went above and beyond the requirements of your job in order to meet a goal or an objective?
Well, yeah, I think the time, and I was referring to the same case, but where we had a bad design that was already out there. And it was at that point in my career, it wasn't really my responsibility. It wasn't my design. It was really my supervisor's responsibility to step in and do it. But for whatever reason, it kind of went again to this void. So, and since I've always been more than willing to help, even if I don't feel like I have the experience, I want to get things done. I want to help. So at that point, it kind of shifted to where the sales department, sales manager even came to me and asked me if I could speak to the customer. So I really reached out to the customer and tried to find out, okay, what's the problem? And then from images or videos, they would send me the product or the problem. And then I would have to basically take it and try to figure out how we're going to solve this problem, which really in that respect, it wasn't my responsibility, but I was more than happy to do it. And I enjoyed the challenge. It just wasn't handled right from a management side.
Okay. Okay, well, Robbie, that's really all the questions I would have for you now. This would normally be where I would turn it over to you to answer any questions that you might have about the position or the organization, but I'm going to pause and check with our panelists if that's what we would normally do here, if you want me to just stop and then we'll debrief or what we would do next.
This is John, Jeff. I would suggest that you, Jeff Claypool, do you have any? Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I think it'd be good if we just had Robbie, if you have any questions, because we worked on this to some extent. You might remember in some of the past sessions. So why don't we just take a little bit of time and answer, Robbie can answer Jeff's question. I think it'd be good just take a little bit of time to do that.
So yeah, so for me to ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, first question, we talking about Tempur Sealy, as far as the size of the organization or the size of the engineering team. How big of a team is it?
Our new product development team is probably about 45 to 50 people here in Trinity. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of nail down an exact number because it fluctuates based on the project. Because sometimes we'll roll in people from sales and marketing because they'll have some input into it. But core engineering wise, in that group, it's about 45 people. Organizationally, we're probably around, I don't have an exact number because it's changed a lot recently with some of the hiring we're doing, probably in that 7,000 to 8,000 employees internationally.
Okay. So like if with a job in engineering there, would I be working generally in a project, would you be working with that whole engineering team or with a group of just a few?
Yeah, it's typically a much smaller group. So the way that our engineering roles would work is you would be assigned to a specific mattress component, right? So if you think about your typical mattress, you've got layers of foam, you've got layers of springs, you've got sort of that external layer of it, and so different engineers might be on different might have different components assigned to them, and then the project team for a specific mattress or other type of product is going to have one or two engineers from each of those areas. And so the team that you're working on, you might be on a project for 6 months or 9 months that's focused on one mattress, and then that product and team kind of wraps up their work. And then you'd be on a different project, potentially with the same people, potentially with different people. It just sort of depends. Sometimes some of our engineers get involved in kind of broader, not specifically like design type projects, but more of, well, is there a way we can, replace this externally sourced component that we're struggling to get today with a different type of product, or is there something equivalent? So I can give you a good example of that. Right now, one of the things that we're struggling with is obtaining the spring units that go inside a bed, so the mattress springs. Our supplier is having some difficulty both from a materials perspective and from, I think, a labor perspective. And so they can't supply us with the volume of springs that we need to meet our demand. And so one of the things we look at then is, okay, well, are there other suppliers or are there other ways of, engineering the product with a different type of spring unit given the ones that they are able to provide us with? So it's a lot of different aspects. Some of it's going to be the design aspect. Some of it is going to be, process or continuous improvement design, and other things in that area. But yeah, you wouldn't work day to day with that whole group. It would be a much smaller subset. Sometimes it's just, for example, sometimes our spring engineers are going to all work on a project together because it's specifically related to springs. Other times, one or two of them might be working on a specific new product rollout. One or two of them might be looking at sort of process improvement type things as well.
Do you have the opportunity as an engineer to there's so many different parts of a mattress, but over time that you would become very well acquainted in even the design of the whole mattress to where you'd have a lot of versatility in your.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think starting off, right, I mean, so let's assume that we hired somebody. So like one of the positions we're hiring for right now is on our advanced development team, which is really looking at what are the technologies that are going to be in mattresses next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So they're going to be focused in their current role more on those types of things, but they're going to have sort of a broad level of understanding of all the different components. And so while they may not necessarily have a real deep understanding of some of the outer material, it's called tick. So that's the fabric on the outside of the bed, but they might not have a real deep understanding. They're going to at least have a base level understanding. And then as, they grow and maybe, 2-3 years into the role, they transition into a new role and they're going to get then kind of take a deep dive into that specific product area. So without changing roles and moving into it, I think everybody on the engineering and product development side is going to have a very wide level of experience. It's just not going to be real deep, except for in the area that they're currently in. But then as they move from one role to another, that experience will deepen in each of those areas.
Okay. Well, got one final question. Just the culture at Tempur Sealy, the hours that people work, is there flexibility, or how does that,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. So, I mean, we establish sort of like core business hours, which are like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. that we expect everybody to be here and available for. But we've been pretty flexible with, especially lately, we allow people to work from home as needed, to sort of job share, time in the office versus time at home. And there's definitely flexibility in the, specific hours and schedule. There are times of the year, depending on the functional group that you're in, so that there's going to be more hours required as we get to, prior to like furniture market and some of those launch schedules that we have for launching new products. It's going to require more hours when we're not launching new products, and it's just sort of the kind of standard, design and development phase. It's not going to be quite as taxing at that point. But yeah, I mean, culture-wise, there's definitely flexibility in terms of the hours and scheduling, that people are working. I would say we are definitely a sort of a team environment, especially in our engineering team. It's a pretty close team. They definitely cover for one another. And so I think there's flexibility in that regard as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Okay, Robbie, appreciate that. And Jeff, one thing we might do now is if Robbie has any questions that you'd like to ask Jeff Busch about the interview itself, and maybe Jeff could answer them for you if you just have a few questions to go through before we open it up to the group.
I guess, well, the one part that sticks out of my mind when the phone rang and then I got fuddled.
Yeah, I mean, we have shifted to these either like a Teams interview or Zoom interview like this. And it is definitely not the controlled environment that it is if you were sitting in my office. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, that really would not impact sort of the decision that I made on whether you were a viable candidate for the role. Because look, at the end of the day, I mean, you're at home, I get it. You might have dogs or kids and you try your best to keep them out. But unless it became such a distraction that we couldn't get through the interview, that's not going to be a factor in, me making a decision. Now, I would say if that had happened at the beginning of the interview and then it happened again and again, and it was like 3 or 4 different times that we were getting interrupted and you weren't taking, some sort of action to correct it. Right. Yeah, that would probably be a factor in my evaluation, but I thought you handled it well, right? I mean, the phone rings, you got up, it sounds like you turned the volume on it down. You were a little distracted in your next answer, but you got right back on track. So that's not a huge issue. I mean, yeah, it's always one of the things where I think if you're doing this type of an interview, you want to do your best to, sequester yourself in a quiet area. And it looks like you've done that. I'll tell you, I've had candidates that we've done Zoom interviews with where I can tell that they are sitting in a Starbucks and they've got headphones on, and that's very brave. But it's worked because they've got headphones and they're sort of off in the corner, and it's okay and it works. But I think any really, I think any good company is going to look at that and go, you're sort of, doing your best, and that's not necessarily going to be a reason why we would disqualify a candidate because, we're in a unique time at the moment.
Right. Yeah, this was a little more, because I love the one-on-one or the coming to the company and interviewing. So
Yep.
that caught me more than I realized was going to catch me.
Yep.
I apologize for that.
No, it's all right.
Okay. What we're going to do now, Jeff, is just open it up to the group that had the opportunity to watch the interview. And if they've got any questions for you, we'll take those questions now.
Okay.
Jeff, hello, my name is Dennis Brooks.
Hey, Dennis.
During Robbie's answers, he did not give any time frames or the companies that he was giving the examples for. So as I was listening, it could have been 2 years or 20 years ago.
Yep.
Did you catch that, and did that make a difference?
It did. Yeah. So yes, I did catch that. I think normally I would ask, I would typically, have a candidate explain, okay, well, like when did that happen? Yeah. So a lot of times with sort of the behavioral based interview questions, I think the more relevant answers are going to be ones that happened more recently. I don't think I provided that as sort of instruction, so I wasn't really holding that against the answers that were provided. Normally I probably would have asked a follow-up question to which role was this in? And obviously if all of the answers are coming from, well, it was a job I had 10 years ago, then that would be a sort of a red flag that would raise in my mind to say, do you have anything like more recent? Because, all of the things that are relevant to, what we're talking about here, it doesn't seem like you've maybe done in the last 5 years. So I think, as you're providing answers, it's absolutely better to provide, more recent examples. But, if it's things that you've done regularly throughout your career, it doesn't necessarily matter whether it was a year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. As long as it's something that you've done and can prove that you've done, I think, throughout your career, that would be more relevant to me.
Jeff, thank you. A follow-up question. Does Tempur Sealy really keep the offices cold enough that you have to wear a
Yeah,
long sleeve
I'm
sweatshirt
freezing in my
summer?
office. Like I put this, I have a polo shirt on underneath this, and so I have to wear this sweatshirt in my office because I'm that cold.
And a question for Robbie. Robbie, first of all, thank you for doing this. I've done it before. I know it's can be challenging. Robbie, I noticed that at the end, you got very flustered with a question and your body language changed. You basically went back in your chair and almost like you gave up. Did you feel that yourself, or is that just something that I saw?
Well, no, it's not, because I know you don't know me, but there's so many examples, and for some reason, I don't know why I got flustered, but I'm so used to giving specifics, and I just got stuck. And in reality, I hate to say this, but so much of that one question where, as far as where I kind of stepped in and just took, where somebody didn't, that's, been a lot of my experience over pretty much my career. So I guess I don't know why, but for some reason I just stuck because I could not just pick one thing out. I was thinking of so many different things.
Let me add on to that too. So when I asked, I think I asked that question and I had one more question after that. That actually was planned to be my last question that I had asked, was the one about, tell me about a time where you identified a problem and took action to correct it. That initially in my plan for the interview, that was planned to be my last question. But my philosophy is I never want to have a candidate leave an interview on an answer that I can tell that they weren't entirely comfortable with. So I have sort of a series of other questions I can just kind of ask at any time of any candidate. And so I asked that question just to get you back on at least you're leaving the interview feeling like you gave a positive answer. Had we had more time, or had this been an actual role that we were contemplating, I probably would have come back and said, hey, let's circle back to this question. Can you think of a time when, and sort of just re-asked it or rephrased it? Because I understand that some of this behavioral based interviewing where I'm asking you to pull examples or tell stories about things that you've done, it's not necessarily the standard way that most people interview. I think most people go into an interview, especially a hiring manager, They just go through, tell me about your job here, tell me about your job here, and walk through like, what's your experience? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the process, you know, as the HR manager here, that's not really my role, because I interview people that are in finance roles, in engineering roles, in supply chain, in marketing, sales, and I'm not, from an engineering perspective, I'm not an engineer. So you could tell me all sorts of engineering things and I'm not going to know whether you're telling the truth or whether you're making stuff up on the go. So it doesn't do there's no value in me spending my time trying to determine, are you technically qualified for the job? So my focus is more on like I said, the organizational fit. And one of the things, and I didn't say this at the beginning, which I usually do, is I usually tell people, you know, I kind of lay that out at the beginning of it and say, you know, part of what I'm going to ask you to do is to think through, you know, different examples of times when you've, you know, faced a particular situation and how you acted in it. And a lot of times what I'll tell people is to say, you know, if you need to take, you know, a minute or so to sort of think through an example and prepare sort of your response, please do that rather than just initially kind of jumping into an answer and then having to, you know, kind of change course 3 or 4 different times during it. One of the things I noticed, and this is not unique to you, Robbie, every candidate does this, is almost every question I asked, the first thing out of your mouth was, yeah, that's happened lots of times. And so I hear that and go, great, you should be able to answer this question no problem and provide 3 or 4 different examples. A couple times you did. That's why I asked a couple of those questions. I asked them a second time. But a couple of times you said that, and then it was like even the first example, I think you struggled a little bit to frame it as a coherent story. But when you're getting the questions where an interview is asking you sort of those behavioral based, and you've heard this before, I'm sure, but it's always think of like it's the STAR models, right? What was the situation or task? So that was the context of it. What was the action? What did you do? And how did it turn out? And the most important part of that is that action component. What did you do? You slipped a couple times. You started saying, here's what we did. And I was going to correct you and say, well, what did you, but then you corrected yourself actually pretty quickly there. But that's the other piece of it. And this is what I coach interviewers on that I train here is if a candidate is continually saying, this is what we did, or this is what the team did, is you've really got to dig in and say, okay, what did you do? Because I'm hiring you. I'm not hiring your team. I want to know what you did. And sometimes people sit on a team and take credit for the team's work. And really at the end of the day, they didn't really do anything. The team did it all, or somebody else on the team did. So you want to hire whoever that person was that did all the work, not the person who's just taking credit for it. But I thought a couple times I heard you say we, but a couple times you said you eventually got back to I on those. So
let me say something on that because, you know, it's been kind of ingrained. I mean, talking about, you mentioned it too, where people will take credit for things and they don't really deserve it. So there's always that challenge, and wherever I've worked, it's like, if I say I, and there's cases where I have, but some people will be like, oh, who does he think he is?
Yep.
You know, and so there's always that challenge to keep people included. So I find myself saying we more than me.
Yeah, it's a natural tendency. I see it almost in almost every interview. And a lot of times if a candidate has continued saying we, I'll tell them exactly what I just said, which is, okay, I understand what the team did. Can you walk me through what your role on the team was? Because I can't hire your whole team. I can only potentially hire you. So I need to know what you do. And that's the same sort of thing I would tell a hiring manager is if you're getting a lot of we, it's okay, that's great. But what did they do? Because that's how we need to evaluate this as well. One other thing, and you didn't do this, but this is sort of another common thing that people tend to do is they start telling an example and it shifts from something I did in the past to here's what I would do, or here's how I would handle that if it were to come up. You didn't do that, but a lot of times I'll have to stop people and say, okay, I understand what you would do. What did you do previously? How did you handle it in the past? Because the example I've always used with training interviewers is I tell them, anybody can say that they're going to go to the gym tonight or that they're going to start dieting or eating better tomorrow. But the people that really do it are the ones that did it yesterday as well. It's always like past behavior is your best predictor of somebody's future performance.
Jeff, Dennis Brooks again. Robbie did something that I'm always afraid to do in an interview of this type. He basically started an example. And he said, wait, that's a bad example. Let me give another one. And I usually just keep going down that rabbit hole and just dig it really deep. But he stopped and pivoted. Is that a good thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Tell me, a good interviewer is going to look for when they ask these questions is going to probably try to get, anywhere from 2 to 3 different examples. So I kind of bounced around a little bit, just to kind of get a couple different questions out there so you could see a couple different questions. But I think in a lot of the interviews, I would ask the same question 2 or 3 times, because I know most people have 1 or 2 really good examples of things that they've done, right? If you've prepped and gotten ready for an interview, you can look at your experience and think of, 1 or 2 really good examples. Do you have 3? Because that really tells me that you really are, you really can exhibit this behavioral trait that we're looking for. So yeah, absolutely. If you start going down a path and you're like, this isn't going to work, this isn't really answering the question, stop and say, you know what? I don't think I'm actually answering the question that you asked. I think I have a better example. Let me start over. That's fine. I would much rather a candidate do that than tell me something that only sort of answers the question, because that doesn't give me the information that I need to make an educated decision on the hiring process.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is Jessica Mitchell. I've got a quick question. You were talking about giving someone an opportunity to take a minute to pull their thoughts together. Would it be inappropriate to actually jot down a few ideas on a piece of paper during that time?
It wouldn't bother me. Every interviewer is going to be a little bit different. So some people might think that's weird, but at the end of the day, no, I don't think it would be. Now, where it would be a little bit strange is if I asked you a question and then you flipped open a book and were like, let me find the answer that I've prepared for that. That would be a red flag for me. That would be a little bit of a red flag, because I would say, okay, well, yeah, great when you have an answer prepared, but sometimes things come at you and you have to be able to do it without being prepared. But yeah, if you wanted to say, sure, let me just think through and jot down a couple quick notes, I wouldn't have an issue with that. Some people are much more visual learners, and they need to have those notes, like to just at least sort of jot down, because it's harder for them to keep their thoughts straight on that process. So yeah, that wouldn't be an issue at all. I would make a note to the interviewer when you're doing that, just to say, do you mind if I just, kind of jot down a couple notes so that I can, keep my answer, coherent for you. I doubt anybody would have any real issue with that. I know that I wouldn't.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, Jeff and Robbie and the team. This is you, Antoine. The question I have for you, basically, I did not get to share or see the job description that Robbie was interviewing for, but I do recall, a wiser man than I always advise us, to try to tie our answers to the job description itself. And since I know you probably know the job description better than anyone, since you were part of the team actually put it out for advertisement. But how do you feel about the candidate not really tying their answers to the job description itself? And in this case, what's your opinion on that?
Let me think about the best way to answer that. Most of the time when I'm interviewing a candidate, the questions I'm asking are specific to things that I know that someone's going to be asked to do in the job here, right? So again, just using one of the last questions I answered, describe a situation where you identified a problem and took action to correct it rather than waiting for someone else to do so. That's pretty standard here, right? We will have problems that will come up, and the expectation is that if you're an engineer on a team, even though it might not necessarily be your problem to fix, that you're going to at least make people aware of, here's what the problem is, so that's either you can fix it, or so that a team of people can look at it and figure out, oh yeah, we need to fix that. So the questions that I ask are automatically going to be things that I expect you to be able to step into the job and do from day one, or at least have some concept of how, of a way you've approached it in the past. So I wouldn't necessarily, from the questions I ask, wouldn't necessarily tell you, try to tailor your answers to something that's in the job description. Again, that's partly because the interview that I'm doing is less about the qualifications and the actual job itself. Because I'm going to ask almost the same set of questions to somebody in an engineering role as I would somebody in our finance and accounting teams or somebody in our sales and marketing teams, because these are cultural things that the company expects. With a hiring manager, yeah, I think that's probably a better answer, where you could look at and say, hey, they ask a question like, tell me about your job here. So you get that type of a question where someone, is looking just at your experience. I would try to tie in things that you've done with qualifications that are listed in the job description or in the qualifications section. So I guess to answer your question shorter than that is, it sort of depends on the question you're being asked.
One follow-up question that I have for you, Jeff. As an engineer myself, a lot of time a problem arises in a project, and as an engineer, we believe, for instance, that a certain approach would resolve the problem, but most of the time, the first or second try may not actually resolve the issue. As my supervisor, for instance, in that position, if I were to actually give it a try and fail the first time and second time, how would your reflection of my performance be because of that?
Well, I don't think that that's anything, I don't think there's anything different with how we would approach things, right? So I think any sort of engineering problem that we have is going to sort of require the same type of approach, right? Even HR, right? Problems come up in HR, and sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, this should fix the problem, and we implement a solution. It's like, nope, that didn't fix it. We got to try again. So to me, it's less about did you get the right answer, and it's more about like, did you get the right approach to it? So again, it's less about, so from my perspective, I guess, it's less about did you just get the right answer on the first try, or did you at least have a solid approach and a thought process for how you came to it. So if you just came to it because you just kind of guessed, I mean, sometimes that's okay, because sometimes that's just how we don't really know what's wrong, and it's just, well, let's just try. This is our best guess in this scenario. But more often than not, what I would be looking at there is not so much did you get it right or wrong, but what was your process in terms of getting you to whatever solution you attempted the first time, even if it didn't end up being the right answer.
Okay, Jeff, with some of the rest of the time that we have, could you tell us a little bit about Tempur Sealy, the types of positions that you are involved with hiring during the year, and
yep,
maybe a little bit about the process so they understand that. That would be helpful.
Sure. So I'll take those in that order then. So here our campus is based in Trinity. We have a couple different functional groups that sit here. This actually used to be, as you know, the Sealy headquarters, and then about 7 years ago, we were acquired by Tempur-Pedic, so the Tempur, the foam mattresses. So now the corporate headquarters is in Lexington, Kentucky, but we still operate some of the functions here. So functionally, that groups that sit here in Trinity include, there's some HR function. We have some sales and marketing. We have most of our finance and accounting teams sit here. Some of our supply chain team sits here. The majority of our IT group, all of our new product development or research and development, probably as it's more commonly known, and then most of our customer service and order entry teams sit here as well. I'm just kind of cycling through the building, make sure I'm not missing anybody. So jobs that we're going to hire for, I mean, almost continuously, we're almost always hiring customer service roles. Those are kind of outbound phone, email, web customer service positions. We almost always have something in our accounting team, whether it's at a coordinator level, so more of like a non-exempt entry level coordinator type role, or accounting level, accountants in payables, receivables, financial planning, cost accounting, a lot of different areas there. Payroll is here, so we also have a payroll group, and we have roles in that area. More often than not, these are going to be kind of mid-level professional type roles, so somebody with 3 or more years of experience. I mentioned earlier, we are a relatively flat organization, so while we do have some supervisory and management positions that open up, we don't have a lot of them. and more often than not, those are filled internally. Now, that's not always the case because some of the roles that we fill it's sort of multiple steps in between the people that we are currently employing at sort of that mid-level and the supervisory level, obviously a higher level function. So we do have some of those posted as well, but the majority of the roles are going to be in those functional areas: finance, accounting, IT, research and development, supply chain, logistics, things like that. We also have a manufacturing plant that sits on campus with us. And so they do hire, obviously, very entry level, just production level associates that are basically building the beds on a day-to-day basis. Then there's also quality roles there, and then supervisory management roles, in that facility as well. So they have, I think, 6 supervisors that work in that facility as well. So those are here in Trinity what we would be hiring for. Kind of a little bit more broader, although I don't necessarily have responsibility for those, is we have some field sales roles that would be based just in North Carolina. They would not be based here at this facility. They're more work from home, customer sales type roles, but we would hire for those as well. Process wise, typically, we will have jobs that get posted to our website externally. From there, somebody, either myself or the hiring manager, is going to do that sort of initial review of anybody that submits a resume. The first step in the process after you've applied is typically just a quick phone screen where you talk with either HR or the hiring manager. That is more of a opportunity for both you, the candidate, and us, the employer, to say, is this the right fit? Because again, I can look at a resume and get a pretty good feel for, here's the role that you might be a good fit for, but we may do things completely different than what you've done in the past, and it might be an environment that's just not a great fit for you. The salary might not be the right fit, so there's things like that. Once that's done, we would bring in candidates for, somewhere from between 1 and 3 rounds of face-to-face interviews. And I say that knowing that what I actually mean by that is Zoom or Teams video interviews. We don't usually do a lot of in-person interviews right now. Part of that process includes a behavioral assessment that we have everybody complete. It is not by any means a pass-fail type of an assessment. Really what it does is we have a profile for the job. A candidate completes an assessment and it tells us how their profile matches up with what we sort of view as the ideal candidate for the job. And then we use that to derive some of the interview questions. Again, it's a little more around like cultural and job fit to make sure like the job's going to require you to be very detail oriented. Your behavioral profile shows that maybe you're not so detail oriented. So how do you manage through that, right? So that's sort of that process. Once that's done, depending on the role, there are some where we do what we call a cross-campus interview, and that would just be with a business partner at our Lexington campus that you'd be working with. Again, they have input into the decision. Typically, that's like the final candidate's going to go through that round of interviews. So again, anywhere from, I would say at a minimum, probably 1 to 2 face-to-face or rounds of face-to-face interviews, up to 3 or 4, depending on the position and the level within the organization. And then offer, background check, drug screen, start date.
Okay, good. All right, does anybody have any questions on the process that Jeff just covered?
Yeah, I do. This is Jeff Dunno. First, I guess I really need to be looking into Tempur Sealy because I think I have a leg up with all these Jeffs that work there.
That's requirement number 2.
Yeah, right. My question is more at the beginning from us candidates looking for jobs and applying for jobs. A lot of jobs don't have any hiring manager or contact information to try to follow up with. What's your what's your guidance to us where we're just kind of applying and then kind of sitting and waiting? What's the best route? I know LinkedIn, you can go and look for people and message. So how do you maybe one, how do you feel about that? Getting LinkedIn stuff from candidates, and 2, just more of your coaching on that for us.
Sure. I think I'm fine with it, right? I understand, so let me sort of, if I can sort of pull back the curtain on our end. So I will post a job for, let's just like mid-level accountant role, right? So, 3+ years of accounting experience. We'll post that job. Let's say I posted it today. by the time I get a chance to probably start looking at resumes first part of next week, I'm going to have, 50 to 75 resumes that are already going to be in that folder for me to look through. Now, a good chunk of those are going to be just people, what we call serial appliers, that every time we post a job, they apply to it. Doesn't matter whether it's accounting, finance, supply chain, new product development. So they just apply to every job. And there are names that I have learned to recognize, like this is a person who just applies for every job that we have. So know that, I would love to be able to get, a personal call out to every single person that applies for a job. But I don't have the time to do that, nor does the hiring manager. So, if you really look at a role and you're like, yes, this role, I definitely meet the qualifications for it. It's definitely something I'd be interested in. If you find contact information on LinkedIn, or, you call and get routed to, through our switchboard, or you happen to know somebody here, I don't have a problem with that. Where it becomes a little bit more of a challenge is the candidates that, that follow up, multiple times, 3, 4, 5 times. I get, phone calls, emails from, about the status of their application. There's a fine line between, sort of that professional follow-up and sort of the pestering somebody with a question or about something. So I don't have an issue with that. I've not actually met a hiring manager that has an issue with a candidate following up, unless it gets to the point where it's like you call Wednesday, you call Thursday, you call Friday, you call Monday, you call Tuesday, right? And it's now less about you following up and more like demanding to get an answer on a status of an application. So like I said, I don't have an issue with it. But it is challenging on our end to be able to follow up directly with every person that applies.
Jeff, Dennis Brooks, from an HR perspective, which job board do you use most often, or do you just use your website and let aggregators do their thing?
Yeah, so so the second piece of that, so we post our jobs to our internal or to our external website, tempursealy.com/careers. And then those get scraped and aggregated by a number of different sites. I think the one where we see the most traffic and sort of the highest caliber of candidates coming from is through Indeed. And I think that's just because of the reach that they have. We don't currently have a partnership with any of the paid job boards like Monster or Career Builder, simply because the free resources and other resources we have been pretty successful for us.
And a follow-up with 2 parts. How about your job postings on LinkedIn, and do you use recruiters?
Yeah, so we do have jobs that get posted on LinkedIn. We actually have an internal recruiter that her primary role is to source out through LinkedIn more the passive candidates that aren't necessarily looking or not necessarily going to see our job postings. So yeah, anything that you see where we post it on LinkedIn, we have a limited number of spaces that we can use on LinkedIn. So we typically identify the jobs there where we are either struggling to find good candidates, or we know that, we're sort of looking for a unique candidate. So those are the jobs that we typically source on LinkedIn. But yes, absolutely, those are, that's one area. And yes, we do work with some third-party recruiters for some of our positions. Tends to be more senior level roles, where sort of just the posting and that process isn't generating candidates. But we definitely work with recruiters. In fact, I have several that reach out to me on a regular basis.
Thank
Jeff,
you.
One question, please. This is used. My take on applying for a position that I see as advertised, of course, I would prefer if I match the job description 100%. But usually if I match it 70 or plus percent, I apply for it. But as an HR personnel who's looking for that right candidate, is there a percentage, let's say, you would say, if that person matches, then you would start taking them serious?
Not that I could give you an exact percentage, but I will tell you it's rare that we will post a job and we will find the candidate that meets every single criteria that we're looking for, except for sometimes an internal candidate. So more often than not, what we'll do is we'll identify what are the when I meet with a hiring manager when we're having a job, when we're posting a position, I will have them identify for me what are the top 3 things that you have to have, and then I'll look for candidates that meet that. And then if they have, so here's the must-haves, here's the nice to have, and here's it doesn't really matter whether they have it or not, but we'll put it on there. And so we're looking at, do they meet the majority of the requirements there? At least they're meeting what are the must-haves for the position for somebody to be successful in the role. So, I mean, your number of 70%, that's probably a pretty good rough ballpark, I would say.
Thank you.
Jeff, this is John Markham. Do you use any type of automated systems to review resumes?
Nope.
Okay, good.
All right.
Our system can source by, I can go into our system and I can do a keyword search for it. But for the most part, we look at almost every resume that, comes in for a job to at least determine a qualification without, a system scoring it or doing anything like that.
Jeff, I have a question. As far as resume format, is there a preference?
The only thing I would advise is if you have a Word document, save it as a PDF before you upload it, because that's going to preserve whatever formatting you put it in. Our applicant tracking system, and every applicant tracking system I've ever worked with, always does weird things to resumes. And so I tend to not care what the format of the resume is, because I sort of expect maybe our ATS, changed the fonts. I'm looking more at, kind of the years of experience, what you did at those jobs, what your titles were, how many jobs did you have, over a period of time. And even that is less of a concern now, because, so when I started in HR 15, 20 years ago, you definitely had you definitely had people who, you were looking at solid, stable work histories. I think over the last 15 years, that's kind of gone by the wayside. And so there's more allowances for, people that are, hopping between different jobs on a somewhat regular basis. Now, if it's, hey, I've had 5 jobs in the last 2 years, that's going to raise a little bit of a red flag, but not automatically going to disqualify somebody. But yeah, in terms of formatting, save it as a PDF, upload it there. I don't care beyond that.
So you're saying, this is Jessica Mitchell again. I'm hearing you say then you don't feel like the ATS has a problem with PDFs, because I've read somewhere recently that there's some ATSs that will pitch PDFs just out.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask the group in general this week, had anyone else heard anything or had any experiences with that? Because I have been doing a PDF, and I was wondering if I'm throwing them into the wind to be blown away because they're PDFs.
Yeah. I can't for sure tell you. There are hundreds of different applicant tracking systems. I know all of the ones I've worked with, which is 3. PDF files tend to be the easiest for me to pull up and review, followed closely by a Word document, and then sort of kind of everything else that's there. But yeah, PDF for me, there's no issues on our end.
Okay, we're getting close to the time where we're going to end, but prior to that, I want to thank Jeff, and I want to thank Robbie for coming in, and Jeff for doing the interview, and Robbie for participating. I think it helps. People get a chance to see that. I think Jeff did a good job talking about Sealy. I want him to know how much we appreciate him doing this. It means a lot to this organization. We've placed somewhere between, I'm going to say 750 and 800 individuals. We've got the website that I've talked to you about before, and I encourage you doing this today, Jeff. You did a good job. And appreciate you, Robbie, for volunteering.
Jeff, about how many people from Triad Career Network have been placed at Tempur Sealy? Can you remember? At least 3 or 4.
There's been 3 or 4 probably.
Yeah.
Customer service was one of them that you mentioned that I know we had 1 or 2 go into customer service. So again, I appreciate it, Jeff. I really do.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Appreciate you participating.
Okay, preview of coming attractions. Next week, we're going to, by the way, Jeff Busch, you did an excellent job. Robbie, you did an excellent job also. I thought this is the first time we've done this in this format. I thought it went very well.
Yeah.
I think everybody really appreciated, got a lot out of the way it went. And so, Robbie, I hope it was helpful for you.
Yeah.
Usually, Jeff will go around the room afterwards because we do it in person and give a rating. We're not going to do that today, but I would say that it went very well. We've got one next week with Braxton and Fidelity. So Braxton, you are going to be prepared. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, good. So hopefully, Robbie, it didn't hurt.
No, I really do enjoy. I enjoyed it. I hated getting flustered like I did, but no, it was.
No,
it was
it's
really good.
part of the process. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, when you
Right.
the more you do it, the better you get at it. So I think it was very well.
Braxton, did you get your job description yet?
I have not, and it would be helpful. I know it's been mentioned in the past about the 54 interview questions. It'd be nice to get that list too.
Okay.
Send us an email to triadcareernetwork@gmail.com.
Okay, I'll do it again. Thanks.
I have to hop off. I've got a 10:30 meeting that I need to
Okay.
be at. So
Good.
thank
Thank
you.
you so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Yeah, we're done. Thank you,
Thanks,
Jeff.
Jeff.
Okay,
Thank you.
folks, I think we have come to, it is now 10:29.
10:29.
Yep. So Jeff Claypool,
Good to go.
congratulations on your technology
Yeah.
leap.
It was a leap.
So
And
it
thank
worked-
you, Teddy Burriss.
Yeah, thank you, Teddy Burriss. So
And Chan, I love the background you've chosen. That's
Yes,
music.
I got a new computer, so finally I can do a background instead of showing my kitchen.
Well, that's perfectly fine, and if it fits your current wardrobe well, you look
Yes.
perfect out there in space.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay, folks. Anybody got anything else?
Okay, take care.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.